breaking down the boardroom barrier, positioning the vCISO as a key business voice, and are MSSPs snubbing web security? Why websites take a backseat to network needs? That and the latest news and trends in the managed security space coming right up on Cyber for Hire.
Building bridges between managed security providers and their clients, it's the podcast where MSPs, vCISOs, and end users take a united stand against cybercrime. This is Cyber for Hire.
All right, welcome friends to episode number 22 of Cyber for Hire. How's everybody doing today? I'm Bradley Barth with SC Media in New York, and joining me today, 12 time zones away in Singapore, is my co-host and partner in cybercrime, Ryan Morris, principal consultant with Morris Management Partners. Ryan, I know you've been doing a lot of traveling lately, but it's soon going to be my turn again. I'll be heading to Las Vegas the last week of May to cover the Cyber Risk Alliance's Identiverse conference. Now, in the coming weeks, we'll be bringing on some guests that tie into this identity and access management show. But for now, here's all I really want to know is which all-you-can-eat buffet should I gorge myself on? Are you a big Vegas buffet fan, Ryan?
You know what? I've become a fan of Vegas buffets again. 20 years ago, the buffet kind of got a bad name, and you really didn't want to eat the seafood there. But these days, they've gotten right back into it, right? I will say, at the Venetian, there's a fantastic restaurant for the buffet. It doesn't look like a cafeteria. It looks like a nice sit-down restaurant, but it's the all-you-can-eat style buffet inside the Venetian Hotel. Fantastic food, and it's okay to go ahead and eat the lobster, even though it's at a buffet.
Yes, you just ignore the fact that everybody's hands touch everything, and then it's all wonderful and delicious.
Exactly.
My main rule of thumb, if it's got king crab's legs, it's a winner. I can easily make a meal out of those and make my money back on that. All right. Well, anyway, plenty to discuss today, as always, but some news just can't wait, which is why we want to share with everyone what's top of mind today. So here's your headline, courtesy of SC Media's Jessica Davis. A new bill introduced into the U.S. Senate proposes the creation of a rural hospital cybersecurity workforce development strategy to help compensate for the lack of staffing in less populated or economically developed regions of the country. The bill, which was proposed by Josh Hawley and shares many of the same elements as a policy proposal previously issued by Mark Warner, would require the DHS to coordinate with the Departments of Health and Human Services, Education, and Labor, as well as rural healthcare providers and learning institutions, to build out a pipeline through training, educational curricula, and legislation. So, Ryan, we know rural areas can be devoid of cyber talent due to this digital divide that exists between have and have not geographical markets. Can an increased presence from MSSPs, especially considering the remote management work from anywhere capabilities, also help with this digital divide? Should MSSPs be strategically targeting rural markets more heavily with their marketing and outreach efforts? Perhaps you can share your thoughts on that as you explain why this is top of mind for you.
I agree with your thesis 100%. The idea that we get into here with the staffing is a very common conversation, and I'm very glad to see some very tangible proposals being made in this direction. There is a digital divide in rural communities. There is a dramatic shortage of cybersecurity talent in all marketplaces. A plus B equals. We all need to get busy in figuring out a way to address these kinds of very important operational needs. I personally think that the ability to target and serve healthcare clients is a more challenging focus and strategy item than focusing on rural marketplaces. I think that's the easier part of this conversation. So to give incentives, to provide education programs, and to really specify that we address this, that's a very good start, and MSSPs should be ready to already be there. If in your business you have a demonstrated ability to serve healthcare clients, then you are already ready to serve rural healthcare clients. Kind of the magic of all this remote technology is as soon as you're not located on-prem at that rural hospital, anywhere other than on-prem is just as good at delivering these cybersecurity services. So we know we need to address the talent shortage. This is a very good and tangible way to start looking at that from the end user's point of view, but it's going to take 6 months, a year before the first candidate comes through. It will take multiple years before we build that pipeline. Can't afford to wait all that long. Let's get started serving these hospitals right now, because they are just as likely to be targeted by the bad guys as a hospital in a major metro area. So let's not wait for a couple of years to get these students through the pipeline. Let's start servicing them today.
All right. Well, agreed 100% with you on there, Ryan. So sharp take as always. And that's going to be our top of mind hot take for the day. More to come a little bit later in the program, but first it's time for our featured MSSP industry topic of the week, presenting our big idea in business, breaking down the boardroom barrier, positioning vCISOs as a key business voice. Infosec leaders shouldn't just be reporting to the boardroom to explain themselves when things go wrong. They should be a regular part of the strategic business decisions and discussions that take place inside of a company's executive halls. That's true whether they're directly employed by the company or if they're a contracted vCISO provided by an external managed services provider. In this segment, we'll discuss how managed service security leaders can land themselves a coveted spot in the boardroom and assert their influence on future business decisions. Now, we've got an excellent guest to guide us through this conversation today. He is Don Pekka, vCISO at First National Technology Services, or FNTS, a leader in multi-cloud, mainframe, and managed security services. Responsible for overseeing security strategy at FNTS, Don has a deep understanding of regulatory compliance, risk mitigation, and threat defense, which he has leveraged through his quarter century of security strategy and IT governance work at many highly regulated healthcare, finance, and higher education enterprises. He's also internal CISO at FNTS as well. So Don, very happy that you could be joining us today. Always great to speak with you. And as always, we're going to jump right into things. So first question for you is as follows. You know, it's hard enough for internally employed security leaders to convince executive management that they deserve a seat at the table, that they should get the opportunity to lend their perspective to the CEO, to the boardroom. So in what ways is it harder, and in what ways is it easier for an external vCISO to get face time with key business decision makers?
Yeah, I'll start with the easier. It's easier because oftentimes when you're paying for a service, you value and you're looking for an outside opinion because maybe there's a lack of trust or a lack of visibility on your internal people's really viewpoints, or you want to take bias and route it out and get an external view of the reality of what's happening in your environment. So it makes it easier for you to come in because you're investing in that and you're bringing in somebody who is showcasing as an expert in that area, and you've probably done your research to find somebody who knows your area and can come in and provide value to you right away, and demonstrative value because you're contracting for that and you know what the deliverables are going to be. If you're inside, it makes it more difficult because you have to overcome the bias of information security and as a siloed service that often only talks through FUD. And when we're bringing fear, uncertainty, and doubt, that's not the way to bring things to the table anymore. You have to bring data and basically provide business discussion in business terms that will allow you to come into the board and talk to business executives in language that they understand and tie it to governance and business risk using data to drive your points home. And oftentimes what I'll do is provide images to even break that data down even more, while also bringing the context of the business and the risk to the business, to the roadmap. If you can't do that, it's going to be a very hard climb for you to get up into that boardroom. And even if you get invited in once, if you don't provide that value, they may never want you back.
You know, Don, I think this is you made a very important point about managing risk and bringing the governance conversation to the board. Most people, we all want to be called trusted advisors. We all want to be taken seriously at the executive level, but a board plays a critical, almost legal fiduciary role in leading government business strategy. As you look at that, are there ways to move beyond fear that are going to be still highlighting risk and making this a priority for some significant investment? Are there good case studies that we can bring in your experience? What's the positive story on this is good for business growth as opposed to just I'm the guy who brings the chicken little sky is falling story?
Yeah. Particularly for like an MSP where we're going and trying to sell to small business, mid-market to enterprise, I have to be able to position security as a good thing for them. And realistically, it is a differentiator. If you can come in and promise your customer that you're in a securely hosted data center and security is a mindset of your company, and you can showcase those controls by talking about what you're doing, be very clear about that, the differentiator between you and your competitor, that gives you a market advantage today because people inherently want security. And if you can market that and tout it, they're going to come to you over somebody who's not doing it if it's an apples to apples comparison. So in that viewpoint, being able to talk about your security versus not talking about it publicly is a good thing.
Don, it's I thought it was an interesting point that you brought up before that an external vCISO or managed service that's coming in and talking to the top level business executives can come in and be in some cases more objective, not afraid to be blunt, not worrying about having to be a yes man for fear of job security, anything like that, free of office politics, and can bring a fresh perspective. I think that's all great. The converse argument that like an internal CISO might give is, yeah, but nobody knows my company better than me because I work here. So having said that, what is the responsibility or the onus on a vCISO before walking into that boardroom to make sure that you really are fully prepared and familiarized with the full business and IT environment of your client before you start going and making wholesale recommendations to a boardroom?
Yeah, I'll always start with I need to have discovery, which means I need to talk to all of your business leaders. I need to talk to your engineers and your architects because they're going to know where the skeletons are in your business. The business leaders are going to talk about the stressors that either the CIO or the CISO are putting on them from a technology or tools perspective. Once you have talked to all those different drivers in the business, and then you maybe go talk to the CFO, what is his concerns about the investments? Talk if there's a chief risk officer. So you want to get to all these people because you want to know, is your cyber insurance, the premiums are going sky high. How are you going to handle that? What's the conversation around how you're going to have to manage your security up as the insurance goes higher and your obligation comes up and you have to meet it somewhere in the middle? Once you've had those conversations, now you can go in and effectively talk to the board because you understand from from interviews and from talking very deeply and frankly with the other people that you're there to help them, and they're going to give you all the data and the points for you to be able to then distill into a business conversation around risk and around what the business can do to appropriately manage that, but still drive business and drive their roadmap forward.
So I'm thinking in practical terms, right? As a third party that gives advice for a living, we have to toe this line between I'm here to help you with best practice versus that sounds an awful lot like a sales pitch, right? As you are trying to position the credibility that you bring to this conversation, how do you make specific technology recommendations? How do you get into this is the way we've done it elsewhere without crossing the line and making it sound like we're selling to the board?
Yeah. I mean, when you spend enough time in security, you understand the pain points of enterprises. So when you come in and you start talking to them, It's really about where do you have pain, where do you think you have gaps today, and then showcasing them the truth by coming in and doing assessments of their environment. And I don't trust those verbal assessments that we do. I want to actually engage them in an outside pen test, not a vulnerability assessment, but a pen test, because that's going to show them the truth about their security from the outside in, where the attackers are going to view it. And it's going to remove a lot of bias. It's going to remove a lot of uncertainty and give actual data points of where you have material risk. And then it's not a sales conversation at that point. It's a, here's where you are, here's where you think you were, and here's where you said you want to be. So let's have a conversation on how you get there. And if you can show the value of doing that pen test and talk about how doing that puts you in a good place because now you have something you can work from and that gives you a source of truth to your state, that's a very easy conversation once that data comes in to then drive the rest of it without being salesy. And then when it comes to like providing vendors, I have to be agnostic as a consultant, right? I can't come in and just give my vendor of choice. I have to think about what their environment is, what their budget is, where they sit in the SMB to mid-market to enterprise. And one of the challenges we have with security tools is they say they're SMB, but they don't really scale to the SMB. And they're not easy to use. So then you really have to get creative in figuring out what can you put together for the SMB to actually be effective, and do that with very little skills or very little team or resources to apply to that tool set.
Don, I'm also wondering what happens as a vCISO when you do meet some resistance on the part of upper level management in terms of really fully bringing you into the fold, making you one of the, just one of the team, basically. What's your advice in terms of how you can ultimately win them over? And while it certainly would be nice and ideal to have as much unfettered access and have the the ear of the board as much as possible, what's really how do you set reasonable expectations for what kind of access you should be getting?
Frankly, it may be a conversation with the president or CEO to understand who are the board members, where are they coming from, why did they bring them to the board? So what's the value to the organization? If you come in and you've done your research and you can talk again to the business, maybe even talk to their experience from a voice of reason of what their business, because then you can kind of see where their bias or their bend may come from. You're going to help yourself to come in and be successful because you've identified upfront by doing your research who you're talking to, and then they're going to accept you more readily.
I'm thinking this through from a board member's perspective, and how many of the things we advise on are industry specific, right? Healthcare is different from financial services. And all of those use cases become, in theory, right, they become intellectual property for a service provider, knowing an industry in detail and being able to make recommendations. I'm wondering your kind of balance between the focus on cybersecurity in general and the posture of the entire organization versus, say, specific business initiatives, right? If we're making investments, if we're launching new lines of business. As you look at that, do you think of it as, I'm just here to tell you about security as an umbrella, and then you guys figure out the business underneath? Or do you actually get down into the details of, oh, so you want to open an office in Phoenix? Here are the things you need to consider in that decision process from a cyber perspective. How do you balance that at kind of an industry intimacy level?
Yeah. Honestly, data privacy laws are driving that to have to go deeper when you start thinking about there are now 9 states, plus you have nationally GDPR. And a lot of these data privacy laws are overreach. So if you know they're going to be going into areas where that's going to be a concern, you have to dive with them there and explain what that means for their business, the additional overhead, and the knowledge of data they have to have. Otherwise, we see regularly where people fail at basic security practices. So I hone on almost without. I mean, it's what you do. You come in and you evaluate. Are you doing your core security right? Are you doing remediation? Are you meeting your SLAs? Because that's where we see companies fail over and over and over again, is the basic practices are done poorly, and that's how actors get in and are in for so long because they're not aware of what's going on. There's so much noise in their environments, they don't actually know what truth is.
Don, I always think it's great when a guest can come in and illustrate some of the principles that they've been espousing through some kind of an anecdote, even if they need to anonymize some of the parties involved that they've worked with. And so I'm wondering here if maybe you can think back to a specific example from some of your own professional experience where you worked with a company as a vCISO, and that company almost had a eureka moment where they kind of realized, wow, we've been missing this perspective all along of somebody coming in with an IT security perspective. And we're now realizing how beneficial this is to what our business goals and objectives are. Is there an example like that comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I mean, in the course of what I do, I just talk to business leaders all the time. And one of them that speaks out is somebody who came in that didn't have any security background, thought they were good. And they realized after just 15 minutes of talking to me that they wanted to bring me in to talk to them on a regular basis, because I started talking to them about just what's happening in the world around security, and they had no idea because they're so focused on their business as an entrepreneur. This wasn't even on their radar, all the stuff happening that could impact that business. And when you think about how many SMBs are attacked once and close their doors because they can't manage the cost of that, that's a very important conversation for us to have today, because SMB drives the economy. And if we can't help them, and I can't have that frank conversation at just a very high level about what's going on, we're never going to get there where they actually feel like they want to invite me to start having conversations with them. Another one that comes to mind is a current customer. We went out to do a luncheon and they just asked me to come along and kind of hear about what they're doing. And so I asked them, how do you feel you are? And they're like, oh, we're good. And I said, so have you thought about, and I started giving them actual use cases of attacks that occurred with their tools, with their configurations, using their environment. And we went to lunch, and lunch was very animated. And they came back and said, you scared the daylights out of us. And I said, that's not my intent. I was just talking about things that are happening. And they said, no, that's just it. You showed us what we thought versus reality, or it's very different. From a practitioner standpoint, you gave us an authoritative view of the real world, and now we realize we need your advice to come in and do that. So that actually offered another engagement for me. Those are just simple conversations you're having around, what do you have in place? Where do you think you are? And then start to have conversations around real things that are happening in security in the real world, that have attacks that have been that have perpetrated, that have stopped business or cost a lot of money, and then take those, take that information and bear it out, and it'll always bear fruit. In my experience, it's always borne fruit anyway.
Well, and see, I think that speaks a lot to not just how wise you might be as an advisor, but the readiness of those customers to hear those stories. We hear a lot of bad stories all around the industry about business people who are not cyber savvy, and they aren't open. They're not willing to hear it, right? So I'm thinking about your kind of line in the sand, if you will, right? In the practical application of board governance, we have to remember boards vote, right? Like it's not just me, I'm the one voice of reason and everybody does what I say. The board has to agree. And then the company officers have to agree and take our advice. Is there a point where you might look at it and say, you know what, I've given you all of my best information, all of the benefit of my experience, and you guys aren't willing to go? Am I willing to stay on the board and continue to advise? Is there a point where you say, this is big enough that it's It's either you guys agree or I got to leave just out of my fiduciary responsibility. How do you manage that voting process and not always being able to give direction?
So if you distill that down, it's really probably going to come about of lack of knowledge, or you're talking over their head. So I would advise, and my personal strategy would be, I'm going to go take an aside and schedule time with those board members that are being intractable, and I'm going to say, hey, where are we not connecting? And I'm going to change my language. I'm going to change my presentation. I'm going to give them as much one-on-one time as I need to make them feel comfortable. Now, they still may vote down, but I'm not doing my job if I don't communicate to them in a way that they understand. And as an educator in many other ways, I understand everybody learns and comprehends different ways. And I have to approach that when I'm talking to individuals to make sure that I give all of them, and this is important because you talk about that fiduciary and legal responsibility. I have to give them the right data at the level they can consume it so they can make the right decision on behalf of that business.
So yeah, I love your mix of this is security best practice versus this is the real world and we actually have to get people to come with us. I think that is a lesson all of us who know too much about cybersecurity can really benefit from. So I appreciate that advice. We obviously could learn a lot from you. And before we let you go here, just in the interest of time, I want to bring you into another segment that we refer to on our program as We Speak Geek. The goal that we have in this world is to not just solve cybersecurity problems, but to humanize the people who do this and get to know you a little bit better. So we always say birds of a feather in this industry, right? We tend to watch similar TV shows and movies, and we have similar preferences in video games and such. What are some of the things you do in your world that really show you know way more about one particular subject than the average Joe?
Yeah, so I'm just going to put this up on the screen for people to see. So there's something called the Man School, and I went through this program realizing that I had serious gaps in what I would consider my wholeness as a man. And particularly, there were times where I couldn't be present, where there's fear or there was doubt. And I had to figure out a way to sow those out and be more effective as a leader and be more present for not only my family, but for my employer and for my team. And going through this program transformed me as an individual. And what I found is a lot of executives, particularly a lot of CISOs and CIOs, are so stressed today that we have addiction going in an epidemic. We have people who are leaving the profession because they're so stressed. And is there a way that I can connect with them? And LinkedIn has been my vehicle where I started posting about men's wholeness and around mindset and around how do you use scripts and strategies and skills to transform how you think about your day and how you handle your stressors. That has resonated so much. I have more traction on my posting around men's wholeness and stress and the topic of fear and doubt. We talk about fear and doubt because that's where we live a lot of times as CISOs. And what if we could change that and come from a state of wholeness? So that's what I do outside my job because it's a passion, because I believe that if we can help people that are in executive roles to be more whole and to re-script how they think about their day and their stressors, we're going to be better for it.
Oh, that's very inspirational and certainly important considering just how truly stressful the job of most security professionals are. I'd be curious, Don, what's an example of one small thing that somebody could do right now today if they wanted to, just to kind of help manage their stress a little bit? Give like one tip, easy to adopt tip that people could do just to make their day a little bit less stressful, something that you do.
The most important thing when we talk about this is it has to be from your voice because we listen to ourselves. So if I say, I am resilient, or I am I am a professional, or I've got this, or I know this, and we say it out loud, and we say it even in the mirror where we see ourselves saying it, that type of scripting over time, I am worth it. I am, I'm a good person. I'm a professional. And we talk about like the incident responders who get hammered every time there's something that goes wrong. And how do you create? So for my team, we go through these resiliency scripts where this incident will not define me. I am better than one result. I can get through this. And you're really talking positivity to get yourself through these, but then you're also teaching yourself to think about things very differently so you don't get drugged down in the day. Instead, you think about, why am I feeling this way? And then speak it out. I mean, and it sounds hokey, but it's the truth of we have to speak what we want to see, not what we're reacting to. And oftentimes we react without thinking about it. Now you have the presence to stop and think, why am I stressed? All right, how am I going to get past this? Well, I'm going to use a script to get out of it, but then I may need to dig deeper to find out why was that stressing me and solve that next.
In general, that concept would apply to all of us as professionals. I see even more value for people who do something like cybersecurity that has so much opportunity to go wrong, right? And we succeed 1,000 times in a row, we fail once, and everybody thinks it's the end of the world. So I really appreciate this. In the spirit of practical advice and your method of reaching out, how can people find you on LinkedIn if they are interested in not just what you're doing on that inspirational side, but also your work as a vCISO?
Yeah, it's linkedin.com/in/Don Pekka.
All right. Well, thanks very much, Don. I appreciate it. And as to your mantra of I am worth it, you are worth it. I'm glad that we had you on the show. It was very illuminating and I appreciate it. And that's going to wrap up the first half of our show. But please return for the second half of our episode featuring our big idea in security, why MSSP's website security capabilities take a back seat to network security services. That and more coming right up, so we'll see you in a moment on the other side.